I wake with a start. My eyelids still heavy with sleep. A strange hum buzzes my open window like the bees in our spring garden. I slap the air around my ears to get them away. The drone surges and throbs into a rumbling snore, louder than any animal on the prowl. I bolt upright and hold my breath. Like a sea of fire, red waves shimmer on the walls of my room. Closer and closer, the sound thunders and bellows across the sky. It's a monster! I tremble from head to foot. The monster's growl swells to a threatening roar. A big bad wolf, his sharp teeth, all the better to eat me with. Mama! I scream and scramble under the bed, clutching my doll. My mother is right there and scoots me up, even though I'm 4 years old, and tell her I'm no longer a baby. I'm glad for her comforting arms. I can hear my big brother Martin yelling from his bedroom. The floor vibrates under our feet. The roar now swells around me, inside of me. The big bad wolf! I shriek, covering my ears. No, Colby, darling. There's no wolf. Don't be afraid. My mother lifts me in her arms and holds me tight. Her short, wavy hair tickles my cheek. We find Father and Martin in the front bedroom, huddled in the red glow by the dormer window. Standing on the foot end of his bed, my brother gazes out at something in the sky. What's happening? Cries Mother, swishing barefoot across the linoleum floor with me in her arms. Air Force maneuvers, bellows Father, but his voice lacks confidence. 4 a.m, asks Mother, bending close to Father's ear. He shrugs. No need to panic, he says, but his voice betrays him, and I sense his anxiety. I want to become a pilot, yells my brother, his face glowing with excitement in the red glare. Look at them go! There must be thousands and thousands of airplanes. Airplanes? I sigh in relief and smile. Slipping out of my mother's embrace, I clamber onto the foot of Martin's bed under the window and stand beside him. With my chin resting on the windowsill, I stare at the sky. There's my big bad wolf. I giggle at my own silly fears. The dazzling flying carpet of blood-red lights thunders towards the west. The stars are veiled behind a pink curtain lighting up the sky. I smile at my father to show him I'm no longer afraid. Father's face glows pink and scared. He drops his head and wipes his forehead with his hand. Why is our father frightened? Airplanes are not scary at all. They just go places in the sky like a bird. Papa, don't you like watching the pretty lights? Look, see? I ask, pointing to the sky. Father's lips pinch into a crooked smile. He does not say a word. We watch the sky until the clouds swallow up the last of the red lights. The stars are twinkling again. The droning sound fades into a hum, like that of a mosquito buzzing off into the distance. Finally, silence. I take a deep breath. Mother turns on the light. No use going back to bed, says my father, in a jerky voice. I stare at him. His face looks haunted and anxious. Fear has chiseled the 3 furrows on his high forehead. He fumbles with the radio on my brother's table. The radio hums and crackles and squeals. Suddenly, the man in the radio blares into the room. This is Radio Hilversum. Today, May the 10th, 1940, hundreds of foreign airplanes of unknown nationality have passed our eastern borders and are now flying in a westerly direction. Father sniffs and combs his fingers through his dark brown hair. His face turns grim, as if he knows something we don't. Father and Mother huddle around the radio, their bodies bent over like trees in a storm. The silence around us feels creepy and strange. The man in the radio isn't finished talking yet. His second news report drops in on us like a meteorite from the sky. The Nazi forces have invaded the Netherlands. My brother waves his hands in excitement. It's war, it's war, he shouts, bouncing up and down on his spring bed. Our father's face turns as white as my brother's bed sheets. He squints at Martin from underneath bushy eyebrows. His blue eyes look wild and watery. You think war is just a game you can put away at night? He scolds, and his voice sounds like the croak of a frog. I may be conscripted into the army or deported to a concentration camp in Germany and never see you again. Martin freezes and stares at him. Father's breath comes in quick succession, quick shallow spurts. His face contorts into an expression of such terror that from then on I associate the word war with fear, its identical twin. Mother says nothing. Pursing her lips, she frowns at father. She squeezes my hand and presses my head against her chest. I feel her heart race under my cheek like an engine gone wild. Now, if you thought that this was a rather unorthodox way of opening up a presentation, you were right, because it was intentional. I wanted to create this sense of the unexpected, just like the Nazi blitzkrieg, lightning fast. No warning, no introduction.
So now I get to do the introduction. I'm hoping that most of you, I'm not sure when going, okay. I'm hoping that most of you had an opportunity to read the poster, hence the reason how you got here in the first place. And so her bio is listed there. But I think this is a particularly interesting occasion for us because when the committee met and was looking for ideas for their presentations, it was really apparent that this book had resonated with people in the past. We'd heard of the book, we'd heard of the story, and so there was a consensus around the table that this was a story that we thought the Friends should hear. This was a story that was worth telling, it was worth knowing about, and it brings us just where we like to be in the Friends, which is learning a more intimate look at war, a more intimate approach to the whole story, individual stories. So it is with that I'm here just basically to say to you, we're indeed very grateful to have her. And I will add that her sons have come into the city from far and wide. There are 2 sons here with her today that have done the journey for her to be with her today, which we think is also very special. So on behalf of the Friends, we please welcome Johanna Lemke.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank all of you for having invited me because this is a very special place to me. It's the keeper of my memories. And it almost brings tears to my eyes to think that when I walk through this building, these are the memories that I share with everything that goes on here. And there are not many of my friends alive, not many of my family alive in the Netherlands to share those memories, but this place does. And not only is it the keeper of my memory, but is also the conveyor of my thanks to all of the soldiers who gave their lives for the freedom of Europe and particularly for my freedom, because I take all this very personally. But then I also want to thank my sons who all of a sudden told me this morning they were right here in Ottawa to be with me, and I had no idea. I'm so grateful for their love and for their commitment.
Okay, boys, you have to wave or something.
Yes. So, the reason I wrote this book, first of all, is because I had a story to tell, and I felt it was important to share it with other people, especially with young people who have never lived through a war and hopefully never will. And secondly, the theme of the book is our choices. We all have choices. And of course, the idea is that we learn from our war experiences. We learn our survival skills. We ask ourselves, what kind of person do I want to be during these terrible circumstances? Do I want to steal? Do I want to help someone at my own expense or at the danger of my family? All these questions go through your mind when you're living through the war. But the book was written for a wide audience. not just for adults, but also for young people, so that they can grow up with Kobe. And the reason I wrote right from the beginning of the war, 1940 to 1945, was that I'm very interested in the development of a child since I was trained as a teacher, an elementary school teacher. And so to see the development of the child from pure innocence at the beginning of the war to a knowledge and maturity beyond her years at the end of the war was very important to me. And then last of all, of course, I wrote the book to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands, which happened 5 years ago. And the book was published then. And now this is the first edition out there, which I'm selling for $30. But the new edition is out, and you can buy it at the bookstore here, and for $34.95. And it's exactly the same as this one, except for the picture. The picture is different. I changed the picture on the front. So now, map of the Netherlands. The story takes place in Hengelo, and I was very thrilled to talk to someone who actually knew where Hengelo was on the map, because they had been to Hengelo, because not many people know where Hengelo is in the Netherlands. You know Amsterdam, you know Haarlem, The Hague, but Hengelo is in that little big box, red box towards the right, very close to Germany, only about 25 kilometers from the border.
Oh, yes.
And as I said, the Canadians certainly knew where it was, or the RAF, because Hengelo was bombed 42 times during the war. And the Nazis certainly knew where it was, because they moved their war railroad office to Hengelo in 1994. Now, why would the Allies bomb a friendly country? The reason was that Hengelo's conception in 1802, the village rapidly expanded during the Industrial Revolution, and it gained a textile mill and the construction of a very important railway junction with direct connections to Germany. So this attracted all kinds of industry with a focus on technology, like Stork, Hazemeyer, Hemaf, KHZ, and Holland's Signaalapparaten, where my father worked later. The Allies believed that the Nazis were using Hengelo's factories and its central station for their war purposes. Picture of Queen Wilhelmina. Short after the invasion, Queen Wilhelmina and Prince Bernhard, the Dutch aide-de-camp, and her cabinet were smuggled out of the country to London, where she formed a government in exile and encouraged her people to speak on Radio Orange, broadcast by the CBC. A month later, Princess Juliana and her 2 daughters sought refuge in Ottawa, as you know. And you know that one of the babies with princesses was born here in the hospital, the Civic Hospital, and the room was declared Dutch ground. And wouldn't you believe it, when I had my little operation years ago, the nurse said to me, "Do you know what room you are in?" And I had no idea. I was in pain. And she pointed me to the plaque on the wall, and I was in the very room where the Dutch princess was born. So that was, I wondered why I was in such a lovely room, because normally when our boys were born, I faced a brick wall through the window. And this room had a gorgeous view over the experimental farm. So, you know, that was really special. This is a very iconic photo. Everybody in Hengelo knows this photo. It's the first bombardment of Hengelo, aimed at the factories and the central station. But as you know, you hear it on the news every day, they missed, and houses along the Enschedese street were damaged. This is our central station, a very beautiful station compared to the fact that it was only a town. This gave it an impression of a city. The Nazis conveniently used Hengelo's central station hub to transport their military equipment, including the dreaded V1 and the V2 rockets. These were destined for the Dutch coast to be employed for terror bombing cities like London, England, Paris, and Antwerp. Now, all throughout the war, we experienced the terror of dogfights or aerial combat overhead. And if we happened to be home, we each had instructions to do the right thing. My mother would push the table over to the inside wall. My brother would run up to get the pillows for our head, just in case shrapnel would get us. And I had to get our little war toy, Piccolo. My mother was a very clever woman. She would only allow us to play with that toy during dogfights so that we wouldn't get bored with it. And whenever a dogfight occurred, our minds were kept on the antics of this funny little Piccolo who would push his suitcase and then jump on it when he got tired. And we would push this little toy between my brother and my legs and never thought about what was happening in the sky.
Yes.
The Battle of Britain. Of course, just empty words to a girl like me. The adults discussed the campaign at length, though, hoping and praying that the Royal Air Force and Navy would repel the large-scale attacks on the United Kingdom by Nazi Germany's Air Force. This stunning painting by Adrian Pinkston depicts the first campaign fought by air forces only. Hawker Hurricane Mk1, the Spitfire, if you can pick them out there, and the Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighting each other in the Battle of Britain. I think that's such a beautiful painting. A Nazi propaganda poster like these, they were posted all over the Netherlands trying to recruit Dutch young men for their fighting forces, and at the same time spreading the lie that the Nazis were only interested in fighting communism. And of course, the translation would be, for your honor and conscience, resist communism. The Waffen-SS needs you or calls you. Now, the Waffen-SS were Hitler's special troops, and they were the worst ones. They were taught to be cruel. And another poster, I didn't see this, but we certainly learned about the message. Although I was unaware of this American World War II propaganda poster, the keep mum in public had been drilled into us children since the beginning of the war. We all knew too well that careless talk might lead to betrayal and its horrific consequences, but also to the undermining of the efforts of the war by the Allies. And these are the Nazi ID cards that we had to get, and I was there when Mom and Dad went to have their pictures taken. And especially, I remember what my mother said when the officer put her finger into the ink. "You're making me feel like a criminal." Mom and Dad were very upset to have to carry these cards. Very often, I would see trains like these, freight trains chugging along to Nazi Germany, long trains with big white and black signs that read, "Love gifts from Holland." When I questioned my big brother about it, he said, "Don't believe those signs. They're big lies. Those trains are filled with stolen goods from our country. Hitler is robbing us blind." And from that day, I concluded that Hitler was a big bad robber. My first lesson in Nazi propaganda. Operation Barbarossa, October 1941. The operation was planned to enslave the Slavic people and deport them to Siberia to create Lebensraum for the Germans, with an eye on the oil reserves in the Caucasus and the agricultural resources in the Soviet Union. And I still remember Hitler's harsh, hypnotic voice on the radio when he would say, "Wir haben noch so viele Kanonen, and so many horses and so many tanks and so many this." And I didn't like him. It gave me an awful feeling when I heard that harsh voice. Early victories were celebrated by the Nazis with wall posters in bold, colorful text and put up all over Hengelo. And my brother and his friends took great pride in vandalizing these posters, adding their own patriotic messages to them. This is a picture by Sandra Peterson from Pixabay. All the photos, by the way, are available to the public. Enemy Under Our Roof contains many historic details and symbolic elements. The symbol of the wolf is one of them, and the crow is another one. While I worried about the fate of my rabbit and learned the names and roundels and fin flashes of all the airplanes involved in the war for my big brother, the adults concerned themselves with Japan's military prowess. Japan planned to attack the United States in secret in retaliation for being cut off from their supply routes and the refusal of the states to trade with Japan. Thousands of Americans, as you know, were killed and injured in the attack, and many United States ships and aircraft were destroyed. President Roosevelt declared war on Japan, and a few days later, Hitler declared war on the United States. The people of the Netherlands once again were filled with renewed hope that Nazi Germany would soon be defeated. And the funny thing about the war is that you're living in an atmosphere of a teeter-totter like this. And the spirit of our people went up and down with the victories of our Allied friends. And as a girl, my parents didn't talk about the war to us because they wanted us to have as normal a childhood as possible. So they never gave us any clues about what was happening.
Friends.
And so as a result, we watched the people. When people rode their bikes and whistled and sang, we knew something great had happened. But if they didn't smile or said nothing to you, no hellos or highs, we knew something bad had happened. That's how we as children would gauge people's fortunes.
Good.
I included this photo as an example of how a child's attitude changes. When the war began, I was fascinated by the Nazi soldiers, by their marching, and I wanted to march along with them. I was fascinated by the songs they sang, and of course my mother had a system with me. We were holding hands, and if she wanted me to stop doing something, she would squeeze my hand 3 times very forcefully. And 1 time meant, isn't this funny? Or did you see that? But 3 times she would do it whenever I had a good look at the soldiers and smiled or waved at them. It was embarrassing to her because she didn't want anyone to think that we had Nazi sympathies, of course. So, fast forward to September 1943, and due to the frequent bombardments, school was closed. I was hunched over my teacher's dining room table with 5 other students being homeschooled. And suddenly I heard the thud, thud, thud of the Nazi boots again. The dull staccato throb of menacing Nazi boots approaching in the distance. Like 1,000 hammers hitting on 1,000 nails. That's the sound of it. I held my breath and I froze in fear. Were they marching to their barracks or planning another terrifying razzia? Now, you can imagine how fascinating songs like these would be to a child. And when I heard that in the distance, I thought it was a choir in the sky. And of course, then when I noticed that they were soldiers, I wasn't supposed to show any interest. My mother wouldn't allow me to. But my friend from my youth in Brookville, he was a soldier all his life, he read my book and he read the chapter about this particular song, and that I heard it sung by these soldiers, and he found this video where they played the exact song that you will find described in my book. And I thought, I've got to show this one because it's just absolutely delightful. This is a picture of the Jewish synagogue. In August 1942, the Star of David became the focus of the Gestapo, Hitler's secret police. With help from the NSB collaborators, and there were many in Holland too, they began their evil ways in Hengelo by looting and destroying the Jewish synagogue. Jewish families, as you know, lost their stores and their jobs, and the children were no longer allowed to attend school or visit the library or feed the ducks in our Prince Bernhard Park. In fact, the name Prince Bernhard Park was eliminated, and it was the Rose Park or whatever. My Christian school principal didn't go along with this at all, and he said Jewish children are welcome in our school because every child needs an education. And I had a Jewish friend who went to school with me, and there are all kinds of stories that I have written about her in my book too, the experiences we had. Now here you see a picture of the town of Hengelo before the destruction, but the pictures are actually after the war. But these streets were not destroyed during the 42 bombardments. So that is what those streets looked like.
Excuse me.
On April the 29th, 1943, Hitler dropped a bombshell of his own on the people of the Netherlands. The Führer issued a decree that the 300,000 Dutch conscription soldiers released after the Nazi invasion were now to be transported back to Nazi Germany to work in labor camps in aid of the Nazi war effort. The citizens of Hengelo expressed their fury by walking out of their factories to stage a workers' strike, which spread across the 10 provinces of the Netherlands. And that was Hengelo's claim to fame. For many years, it was not mentioned very much in Hengelo that this is what went on, that the Hengelo people were responsible for the strike. But now, last year, I went back to the Netherlands, and I noticed coming through this beautiful station that on the ground, it had a plaque on the tiles saying that this was the beginning of the strike, of the workers' strike in Hengelo on that particular date. So they were acknowledging it. Now, these were the searchlights that I grew up with every night. Now, this picture, obviously not from Hengelo. I could not find a searchlight in Hengelo. This is Gibraltar, actually, but it gives you an idea of what these searchlights are like and how they traveled across the sky and sometimes peeked into my window, and I knew exactly, and I was afraid for any Allied plane that might be caught in its light, and of course, would be shot. In 1943, in the deep of night, RAF bomber squadrons roared increasingly overhead on their way to the Ruhr Valley in Nazi Germany. We'd be torn from our dreams by screaming sirens and the flak of Nazi aircraft guns, barking in fury at the approaching RAF fighters as they roared over our town in the deep of night. My brother and his friends were asked by the underground to scour the countryside for these portable shooting platforms and then report to the underground. So on June the 14th, 1944, Nazi flak shot down an English RAF Lockheed Lightning fighter near Hengelo's central station. If the airmen were lucky, they would land by parachute and hide until the resistance fighters found them. They had the skill and the training to sniff out downed pilots in the most unthinkable places, then smuggle them back to England to prepare for the next mission. And now I'm going to show you something very special. This necklace was made by my father for my mother's 40th birthday during the war, and it is made of downed airplanes plexiglass. You know what teenage boys are like. They don't listen to the rules. They would go to these forbidden sites where there was an airplane crash, and they would bring back all kinds of airplane glass and also bulbs from the radio, so Dad could use them for his shortwave and message to the underground. And also, the light bottle. I will talk to you about that. But this is something really special. It's a museum piece. It ought to be in this museum, but I'm hoping the children will treasure it as much as we always have. And then Mom wore it for many years. I don't know how Dad did it, how he cut each one a little bigger than the other, and the largest one is in the center, and it has a silver thread through it. But I don't wear it. It's just too precious to me now. But have a good look at it, because it's rather special the way it was made. Now, did you know that Audrey Hepburn was also working for the underground? I see people nodding their heads. Yes, she grew up in England and in Holland, and because she spoke English as well as Dutch, it was easy for her to qualify, to avoid suspicion. And she would take little papers to our messages to the underground in her woolen socks, in her wooden shoes, and people would not suspect her because she was just a 15-year-old girl. But what I do find very interesting, one day they were liberated, or on the day that they were liberated, she asked a Canadian soldier for her first cigarette. And that cigarette became her icon of World War II, which I found really interesting. My icon is something different, which I will show you later on. Now, these are very special to me. Because of the war, I love airplanes. I don't know why, but my brother taught me all the names, and I've forgotten most of it now, but these are very special. This is the de Havilland mosquito, and it is called a wooden wonder because it was made from the Sitka spruce trees in Haidegwai. And my girlfriend lives in Haidegwai, so she told me that story. I thought it amazing. I had never imagined an airplane could be made of wood. Now, these mosquito fighters had the reputation of being the fastest and the lowest flying planes. And so that's why they could evade detection from the lights, searchlights, and so on. So one of them did just that, fly right over the rooftops when my friend and I were playing in the garden. The pilot waved at us, but we were too afraid to wave back. We just threw ourselves on the ground, and we thought he's going to crash into my girlfriend's roof, but of course they didn't. Amazing planes, just amazing. Now I'm showing you this picture. As I said, I was in the Netherlands last year, and this is the famous Tuindorp bath. It is the only natural swimming pool left in the Netherlands, and it's a very historic place. It celebrated its 100th birthday a few years ago. And the lifeguard actually lives on the premises, and you can see the houses back there, with his wife and children. And this went on during the war, too. And of course, one thing that people don't realize, if you haven't lived through a war, often people think that you're hiding in the cellar all day long or not going to work. But life goes on during the war. And we would go to our swimming pool every day. And we had, of course, passes to get in. You have to pay a certain amount of money. And the Nazis would not allow Jewish people to go. But the lifeguard closed his eyes, didn't listen to that. And even the German soldiers, the Nazi soldiers would come in. But if they didn't have enough money to pay the fee, he wouldn't let them in. He was very strict that way. He was like a father to all of us. But one year we came in 1944, we wanted to go swimming, and the whole place was surrounded by barbed wire because a bomb had fallen into the water right there, actually, in that spot on the left. But one of the girls reports that she was swimming there and a fish crawled into her bathing suit. That's a natural pool for you.
Yes.
Now, last year, as I said, I went to the Netherlands and I went to Hengelo. And the sad thing was, not a soul was alive. Not a soul I knew was alive. No friends. My family had all died. And I thought, what am I going to do? It's a very strange, lonely, weird feeling to be in the city of your youth where you were born and not to know anything. So I decided to make my own meaning. And I visited every place I talked about in the book. And one of the first places, of course, was this place. This is Hotel Lansing. Now, it's a very interesting story. Hotel Lansing, the city of Hengelo, is synonymous with Charles Stork, an industrialist and founder of the Stork Locomotive Factory. He had a big heart for his workers, and he built an entire district with schools and houses where employees and managers could live side by side. And Hotel Lansing on Stork Square and the Tuindorp swimming pool are at the center of the attractive garden village, and nothing is allowed to be changed there. So when I wanted to stay in that hotel, they had no air conditioning because it wasn't allowed. It's a beautiful boutique hotel. But the reason why it was so important for me to stay there, this hotel is associated with a family secret that very few people know about. And of course, I wanted to relive the whole experience. Now, as I said, Mr. Stork was very interested in education for the children of his workers, and so he built on the kindergarten school on the right of the hotel. You see, the hotel is on the left, the school is on the right. Now it's been changed into a bar, beautiful big bar. But the lady, when I told her the story, she actually showed me the little room behind those green doors, because it's those green doors where we went in and where we had that experience also, that secret experience. But I'm not going to tell you that, or I'll spoil the story in the book. Now, this is the back of the hotel, and you can see the stairway. We were smuggled into this hotel on that stairway, into the kitchen and into the place. And when I was there last summer, I went up that stairway, and of course the chef was standing there wondering what I was doing there. And I said, I just want you to know, I was smuggled into this room during the war in secret. He said, smuggled? I said, yes, smuggled. And that's all I told him. But in any case, the hotel management doesn't want you to know this story, because when often things happen in certain buildings in the war, after the war, they would tear down those buildings. And so it's not something that they like the whole world to know about. Anyway, in 2004, the city of Hengelo bought this historic boutique hotel and renovated it and changed the kindergarten into a bar, as I just said. And I stayed in this wonderful hotel, and believe it or not, at the back of the kindergarten was a sandbox, a garden, a whole big garden of sandbox. And the tree that we played under was still there. And it just brought tears to my eyes. It was so special. Just when we thought the war would never end, D-Day happened. The good news of the Allied invasion of Normandy, France on June 6, 1944 spread like a spring tide at full moon. Although thousands of brave Allied soldiers lost their lives in the fierce battle with the Nazi enemy, our spirits were revived by the belief that the end of the war was in sight. Operation Overlord marked the first step in the liberation of Europe. So during the war, the iconic windmill was not the only employed to grind grain or drain water in the Netherlands, but the position of the sails of the windmill could be used to convey secret messages to the underground or warn against impending Nazi raids. But that summer of 1944, it wasn't a windmill that warned my family against the Nazis, but a neighbor who had jumped the back fence to warn my mother that a Nazi officer had been standing across the street staring at our house for 10 minutes. Now, how common is that? He finally rang the doorbell and demanded to billet in our house. He introduced himself as Kruger. Mother told him we had no room to spare, and he should look for a place where they have no children. The Nazi officer thanked Mother, clicked his heels, and left her. After several hours, the doorbell rang again. Now I'm reading from the book. Gnädige Frau, Madam, I tried everywhere but found no suitable place to stay. I request to use your house as my sleeping quarters. Looking him straight in the eye, Mother objects in a polite but firm voice. I'm sorry, but we have absolutely no room for you. Each bedroom is taken up by a family member. Herr Kruger stands his ground. I can sleep with your son. Kruger's voice implies that he wants no further argument. That's impossible, argues Mother. You are a Nazi occupier, and we are Netherlanders. The man lowers his eyebrows and glowers at Mother. She shows no fear and glares right back at him. Gnädige Frau, he begins impatiently, but Mother interrupts him. At least allow me to consult my husband tonight, she says, desperately trying to find a way out. In reply, the man in the Nazi uniform shows Mother his paper. She glances at it. Do you have any idea what you're asking of us? She says, indignation sharpening her voice. He raises his hand as if to stop any further argument. Ganz bestimmt. Most certainly. My sleeping quarters at school downtown are uncomfortable and subject to bombing. I want to stay in the suburbs and live to see my 5 children again. Yes, I understand your concern, but it's wrong to force yourself on our family without any consideration of our position, she says in a fearless tone of voice. What you are asking of us is totally unacceptable, and I cannot agree to it. She steps back, closing the door ever so slightly. Gnädige Frau, he says sternly, I ask you to consider the consequences of your refusal. Mother stares at him, her eyes blazing defiantly. She's mad enough to bite off his head, but wise enough to control herself. Right then, I realize Mother is in a bind. What will he do to us? I tug at her dress at the back. If she refuses to let him stay, we might be put out on the street. My brother told me so. He said his friend and family were evicted, and I know that means losing everything you own. Does Mother realize that? Where would we go if we are forced out onto the street and I would lose all my friends? Herr Kruger takes a step nearer with his order form. I will be back at 9 o'clock tonight. Mother stares at him. She says nothing. I jab Mother in the back. When at last she opens her mouth to speak, her voice sounds flat and resigned. You have obviously made up your mind. There's nothing more I can say. What must be, but I find your attitude offensive. Danke, he says, dismissing her remark with a little bow. Have my bed ready by 9 tonight in the room facing the street, orders the soldier, as if he were my mother's boss. Guten Tag. He clinks his heels, shoves the paper in her face. Mother glowers at him and tightens her lips in frustration. Her round eyes narrow to slits. She snaps up the form and closes the door without saying a word. Seating herself at the table, she clasps both her hands over her face. I can't tell whether she's crying or praying. Probably praying, because I've never seen my mother cry. Our sociable Mother is unusually quiet that afternoon. She doesn't feel like talking. She sews and sews my father's coat and sews some more, glancing at the mantel clock occasionally to see when Father and Martin are expected home. Her state of agitation grows as the minutes fly by. At 5, I hear the ring of a bicycle bell. Martin's home, I yell. I'm skipping a piece here. After Martin has washed up, Mother asks him to sit beside her on the sofa. I have something important to tell you, Martin. With my Gretel doll in my lap, I watch the two of them from my seat at the table. Martin throws her a curious glance. Mother takes her time. She's probably praying to God to put the right words in her mouth. Martin, she says at last, I have very bad news for you. Please try to remain calm. You will hear the details later when your father comes home. She takes my brother's hand and continues. A Nazi officer came to the door today ordering me to provide lodgings for him. I argued and pleaded with him, but to no avail. Martin pulls his hand away and stares into Mother's face. He will be here tonight at 9. Mother hesitates. And here's the worst part. He wants to sleep in your bedroom with you. What? Marks Martin, ready to eat Mother alive. He shoots to his feet like an arrow from his bowstring. I'm not sleeping with that rotten... Shh, stop it, boy, interrupts Mother. I'll have no abusive language in our house, no matter who you're talking about. What if he kills me? How would you like to sleep in a room with a Nazi no-good? Let's believe the good in him will prevail. He has a family.
What the?
What will I tell my friends, the neighbors, and... The truth, Mart. We're all in this together. We must accept what cannot be changed. God will see us through. My brother stomps out angrily. He storms up to his bedroom, banging the door behind him. I don't blame Martin. Last thing I want to do is sleep with an enemy in my room.
And
For an hour, the house is silent, like the calm before a storm. Mother keeps busy with supper preparations. I quickly set the table. Then I grab my living room explorer book and pull up a chair by the window so I can see the front gate. At 6 o'clock, I hear the front gate slam. I jump up. My book tumbles to the floor. Father's home! I yell nervously. Martin pounds down the stairs and joins us in the living room. He wants to hear Father's reaction to the bad news. The instant our father walks through the door, he stops and stares. The tension in the room hovers overhead like a dark thundercloud. What's wrong? He asks, raising his eyebrows. Now just hear me out, says Mother. She puts up her hands as if in self-defense. I'll explain everything in detail. She speaks softly and becomes more excited as the account nears its conclusion. Believe me, I tried every argument to send him on his way. Mother's eyes plead with Father. The blood is draining from his face. His lips screw up. I hold my breath. He wouldn't listen to reason, she cries. I was forced to billet him for an undetermined period of time. You what? Cries Father. He didn't say good morning the way he usually does when he's surprised. Am I hearing you right? He's trembling like a volcano ready to erupt. You opened our house to a Nazi? With lips thin and drawn, he spits out his words, spray flying in all directions. Be reasonable, cries Mother, color rising to her cheeks. What would you have done? Tell me. She hands Father Herr Kruger's order form. Would you have us evicted? Father jerks his head. He has no answer to that. He reads the order, hurls the document on the table, and stalks out the door. Martin quickly snatches it up and reads it. Dirty deal, he yells after reading it carefully. I hate the way those Nazis lord it over us. He throws the paper on the table. I'm not sleeping in a room with the enemy, and that's final. Mother sighs deeply. One thing is crystal clear to me. My family is at war, just like my country. So the evening is spent in gloomy silence. We're working against the clock to move our bedrooms and possessions around. Martin moves into my bedroom, and I build myself a canopy bed out of a cot and 2 ladder-back chairs in a corner of my parents' bedroom. Father's outburst sums up the experience. Insufferable, he mumbles in a deadly voice. Having our rights taken away in our own country is bad enough, but not being able to say and do what you want in your own home is intolerable. And just as that last word rolled off his tongue, the doorbell rings. I freeze. Jawohl! Shouts my brother in German, sarcasm dripping from his voice. He clicks his heels and Nazi salute. Father's face turns white. His eyes shoot daggers. Clutching at the door frame, he hurtles around. Into your rooms, now. Keep cool, whispers Mother. With my cheek pressed against the bedroom door, I listen carefully. A mixture of fear and curiosity holds me like a vice. The front door opens. I hear a loud "Guten Abend," followed by a low murmur of voices. Hard as I try, I can't make out what they're saying, but I can clearly hear the clatter of coat hangers and opening and closing of doors. They're in the living room now, and the hallway is clear. I tiptoe across the stair landing to my brother's bedroom and sneak inside. Father and Mother showed him the washroom and the kitchen, I whisper, closing the door cautiously. My brother spins around with a pile of books in his arms. Colby, why are they in the living room? I ask. Shh. Martin cuts a finger across his lips, ignoring me. He lines up his books on my table underneath a red sports car poster on the wall. Kruger's probably telling our parents what to expect, he says finally. Imagine Herr Kruger strutting around our house, ordering Father and Mother around. I slump down on his bed. Yeah, the jerk. What if he hurts us? My brother doesn't answer right away. His brown porcelain owl is demanding all his attention. He tries it out on my windowsill. Never trust an enemy, he says at last. Keep your eyes and ears open wide. For what? Not now, Colby. Better hurry back to bed. Those enemy boots will march up those stairs any minute. I open the door a crack, peer downstairs, and listen. Light, I whisper, turning my face to him. Martin smiles and pulls my braid. Having brushed my teeth with salt, I switch off the light and jump into my nightgown in record time. Just as I am about to heave myself onto the cot, I pause. Wait a minute. Isn't this my elegant canopy bed? Didn't Father say it is a bed fit for a princess? I stand up tall and jut out my chin. Lowering myself gracefully, I slide under the covers, legs together and toes pointed like a ballerina. That's as far as my imagination takes me. Rolling onto my stomach, I sprawl and sigh. My muscles relax like a rag doll. This is no stage play. The enemy has moved in. He is sleeping under our roof.
No.
Suddenly, what? Will we ever be free? My mind is spinning. Why ever did he have to pick our house? What will Herr Kruger do to us? The very thought gives me the goosebumps, and even if he means us no harm, nothing will be the same. Suddenly, doors slam. Footsteps thump up the stairs and halt on the stair landing. The front bedroom door squeaks. I lie perfectly still. Herr Kruger and our parents mumble a polite good night, their voices betraying their real feelings. Our bedroom door opens. Father and Mother enter in eerie silence, a silence that screams louder than any spoken word. The key clicks in the slot. Father has locked our bedroom door. And after Kruger moved in, things went from bad to worse. As you can imagine, after 4 months of living with us, the first 4 months weren't quite so bad because he left at 6 a.m, came home at 9. But after that, he asked us if he could eat with us at the table. And that's when all the problems began. Because Father wanted to know if he was aware of what the Nazis were doing to our Jewish people and to our own people. And Father spoke German and English, and they carried on conversations at every supper time, and you could cut the tension with a knife. It was very, very hard on our family. And he, of course, would be spreading his bread with thick butter that came from his office. And we were eating dry bread and had potatoes and carrots one night and carrots and potatoes the next night. And he had all this wonderful food, and I would just watch his plate. My brother and I would watch his plate. and spread our bread with anger, as so to speak. It's now October the 6th, 1944. And while the Battle of the Bulge was raging in the snowy forests of the Ardennes, Hengelo experienced the most daring and violent bombardment of the entire war in broad daylight, without any air raid warning. 70 American B-26 Martin Marauders began to batter Hengelo at 12 o'clock noon, dropping their bombs in quick succession from great height. And that, of course, was a big mistake already, because you don't know where it's going to end up. Their targets were once more the factories and the central station. But my mother and my brother and I, we stormed into the cellar, believing all men in the offices and factories to be dead, because there had been no air raid alarm. Eventually, the distressing news leaked out that the factories remained intact, but the entire business section of Hengelo had been wiped off the map as you would wipe a plate clean. But Father was alive, and he was my best birthday present ever that year. So how did this miracle happen? Normally, when there's an air raid alarm, the men in the offices and factories would run to the city, to the downtown, where they would hide underneath the ground. And that's, if they had actually done that, there would have been thousands of people with their lives lost. But in this way, 200 people lost their lives, and half of them were German Nazi soldiers, but the other half business people who worked there. It was a terrible, terrible time in Hengelo, and people were in despair. In the summer of 1944, the Allies were in our land. The teeter-totter went up again. Maastricht in the south had been liberated, and the Battle of Arnhem was raging. You've probably all seen the film A Bridge Too Far. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful film. Hitler was desperate because he knew it looked as though he might be losing the war, and as a last resort, he developed his newly invented vengeance weapons, the V-1s and the V-2 flying rockets, to bring destruction to London, Paris, and Antwerp. The V-1 was nicknamed the Doodle Bug, and I remember seeing them buzz lazily overhead, and they weren't destined for us, so I would just watch it go, and we were fascinated by them as children. But the V-2s, they were the silent killers. They would sneak up on a target like a thief in the night. Did you know that it took 30 tons of potatoes to make ethanol fuel for only one V-2? No wonder we had no potatoes during the war. They were hard. Operation Manna, or Chowhound, April 1945. It is known as the Hunger Winter in the Netherlands. Over 3.5 million Dutch citizens in the west of the Netherlands were starving. The west of the country had not been liberated yet. The famine was a result of a severe winter, and also because the Nazis had bombed the dikes to flood the land, thus cutting off food supplies and shipments, preventing people from buying forbidden food from their farmer friends. And of course, it was also in retaliation for the National Railroad strike, which started during the Allies' Operation Market Garden in 1944. So Eisenhower arranged a truce with the Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Nazi governor in charge of the Netherlands, and the Allied forces were then allowed to drop 6,680 tons of food from their RAF Lancaster bombers without Nazi opposition. It's one of the few good things they did. But of course, the pilots were very worried that they didn't keep their word or wouldn't keep their word. Here is a photo of the British 7th Hampshire Regiment advancing on Hengelo. Now, this may surprise you. Hengelo was not liberated by the Canadians, but by the Brits. The date was Tuesday, April the 3rd, 1945, and in the drizzling rain, the Allied forces advanced on Hengelo from two directions, meeting with stiff resistance from the remaining Nazi forces. And the Brits liberated Hengelo as they were passing through on their way to Germany. The Canadian forces arrived the following day, and they remained for 4 months, heroes all. And the people of Hengelo are eternally grateful for all the sacrifices they made. And whenever I see this slide, I can't help thinking, freedom, the most ineradicable craving in the human heart. And unless it was taken away from you, you don't appreciate what it's like. Now, this is my icon in World War II. When I think of World War II, that's the picture I have in mind. And you know why? Imagine being holed up in your house for 3 days under threat of death if you were to open your door or open your window. I wanted freedom so much I could taste it on my tongue. And on that 3rd day of confinement, I scamper back and forth like a rabbit from one cellar to the front room and back. The sky cracks and bangs and booms. The house shivers and shakes. I can't read. I can't play. I can't concentrate. Finally, an eerie silence, as if the city is holding its breath. The hands of the mantel clock crawl by hour after hour. When are our liberators coming? Waiting is torture. Suddenly, an odd rattling noise up the streets makes me peek through the curtain crack. I gulp and freeze. Tanks! I scream. Martin pushes me aside. Holy mackerel! The Tommies, the Brits are here! Our liberators, they're here! He shoots out the door like a rocket. What? I follow on his heels. Every heartbeat shouts, free, free, free. We scramble onto our gate posts and watch wide-eyed. A dozen squeaking tanks growl towards us. Down our red brick street crunch the steel caterpillar treads of the British Tank Brigade. They creak and grind until they are parked at a slant on our wide grass-lined sidewalk. Daffodils beam and tulips wave. In the median park, the Japanese cherry trees blush pink with joy, intoxicating our liberated street with their fragrance. Neighbors spill out of their houses like bees to a picnic. They laugh and they cry. They shout and wave their flags. Though the sky looks gray in no time at all, the street is painted with color, red, white, blue, and orange. Our liberators arrive bearing precious gifts of peace, friendship, and laughter. A soldier from the nearest tank tosses me a brown soapbox. I leap from my gate post and run to greet him. Although I don't understand the language he speaks, by the teasing way he tugs at my braids, I know that he has come as a liberating friend. He sweeps me up in his arms, and then he plunks me on his gigantic tank right in front of the caterpillar wheel. And that is the picture I have of World War II liberation. And that tank will be forever with me in my memory. Now Mother flies out of the house, her orange scarf flapping like a pennant in the breeze. Thank you, she cries in English, having difficulty pronouncing the English digraph tha. Tears of joy stream down her cheeks. Father, always the radio buff, asks a British soldier if he can peek inside his Sherman tank. Waving Martin over, he is eager to explain the tank's communication system to my brother. When they are finished examining the tank interior, Father pats each soldier on the shoulder, expressing his gratitude. How we danced that day on Mayor Janssen Square to the blaring music of a loudspeaker. A jubilant crowd, drowned in a sea of royal orange, roars the Wilhelmus, the Dutch national anthem. The sky is an artist's palette, flashing red, white, and blue. The big, bad wolf is dead. This book was written by a Frenchman just after the war, and it is the story of World War II in animal language, depicted by animals. And of course, the Nazis were the wolves. And the book was translated into Dutch, and I inherited it from my brother who died 2 years ago. And it's a very special book. It's no longer for sale, and if you want to buy it, it'll cost you $120 to buy a book like this online. So it's very special. Have a look at it. Okay. I touched the wounds of war and believed. This damage, the plaque is just to the left and the right, but you can't see the lettering, but it says this damage to the City Hall occurred during combat operations between the Canadian liberators and the Nazi occupiers during the liberation of Groningen in April 1945. Now, Groningen was liberated later than Hengelo. So that's why I'm showing you this picture. And as I said, I was in the Netherlands last year, and I went to the city of my grandparents. It's a beautiful old ancient city from the 1100s with a tower that's 700 years old, and it has a carillon. And as I placed my hand on the scar, I felt the gunshots, the suffering and the pain of that fierce 4-day battle in my grandparents' home city. And my heart filled with compassion and gratitude to the Canadians of the 2nd Infantry Division, grieving the loss of 43 comrades who sacrificed their lives for strangers in a foreign land. And the story goes, this is very exciting to me, that the people in Groningen who were wise and brave, they hid all the bells of the carillon somewhere so that the Nazis could not melt them down as they had done in other cities. These bells were hundreds and hundreds of years old, real treasures. So when the Canadians liberated Groningen, they got the bells, put them back up into the carillon, and they played not the Dutch national anthem, but "O Canada." And the Canadian soldiers and the commanders were so thrilled, they had tears in their eyes that he would do this kind of thing. It was very touching. The day after the liberation of Hengelo by the Brits, the 2nd Canadian Corps Algonquin Regiment arrived in Hengelo. And people hugged and kissed, and the Canadian soldiers, and they hitched rides on their vehicles. This is Hotel de Wereld, which means Hotel of the World. And it's in Wageningen, near Arnhem, May the 5th, 1945. This is the hotel where the negotiations between the Canadians and the Nazis for surrender of Nazi Germany took place. May the 5th is forever known in the Netherlands as Liberation Day or Freedom Day, with heartfelt thanks to Canada and all the other allies. And here they are signing the capitulation. The capitulation, it took place in the auditorium of the National Horticultural High School in Wageningen, next door to the Hotel de Wereld. The pen used to sign the document can still be seen in the local museum. On July the 8th, a bronze plaque commemorating the Capitulation Act was presented by General Folks, Canadian, attached to the wall of Hotel de Wereld. Now, there's a funny story attached to this, and I just love it. I came across it not too long ago. The Nazis are sitting on the right, the Canadian commanders on the left, and I think the person on the very left was Prince Bernhard. But the Nazis, they think he's on the right there. Is he on the right? I can't quite tell. But in any case, the story goes that the Nazis did not know that this was Prince Bernhard. So one of the commanders said, I'd like to introduce Prince Bernhard to you. So the Nazi guys stood up behind their chairs, saluted Prince Bernhard, and what did Prince Bernhard do? He lit a cigarette in disdain. And when I read that, I laughed so hard. I thought that was the funniest thing. So anyway, that's the story that goes them up. And this is my neighborhood gang. These are all the children. I'm on the right. I had a hole in my pants because I fell, and so I'm hiding it with my knee. But these are all my friends you will read about in the book. And of course, my parents and my brother play a big part in the story too. So it's a book for everyone to see how they handled the war. And here you see our family with William McKeever. My brother spoke 3 languages because he went to high school, and there we were taught 3 languages, and he spoke English and German fluently. And so he walked past one of the schools where the Canadians were housed, and he said, "You want to come home with me? It's much more comfortable." They were complaining about their hard cots in the room. And he said, "Come on home with me. My mother is a hospitable woman. She'll take you in." And they poked each other and said, "Are you sure?" "Oh, yeah, come on home." Well, fortunately, my mother and dad welcomed them with open arms. But I was there, and I can still see her standing there. She said, "Welcome." She spoke a bit of English. "Welcome to our house, but no tipsy soldiers. We have children here." "Oh, no, we're not like that. We're not like that." There were 3 of them. 2 weeks later, at 2:00 at night, one of them walked in dead drunk. My mother was waiting for him, and she said, "What did I say? No drunken soldiers. Pack your suitcase and go back to the school." But the other Uncle Bill, we call him Uncle Bill, Bill McKeever from Brockville, and you've seen the pictures of them over there on the table. They became friends for life. And Uncle Bill would take me on his knee and teach me English words, and I was very, very proud of one English word that I had learned from the soldiers. And when I spoke it, Uncle Bill said, "Oh, that's a bad word. Don't ever say that again." And this is Nick, the other Canadian soldier who lived with us. And he was very special to my brother. He was only 18 years old. And he thought of my mother as his second mom. And my brother, who was 16 at the time, and Nick got along famously. So both of them lived with us for 4 months, and they slept in my brother's bedroom, where just days before the Nazi soldier had been sleeping. That's the irony of war, right? And our beloved liberators, Uncle Bill and Nick Rurak, became friends for life. My parents, and they came to visit us, and we visited them. We lived with Bill McKeever for 2 years, actually, before we bought our own house. Now, you know this picture, the Tulip Festival, established to celebrate the historic royal gift of tulips from the Dutch to the Canadians immediately following the Second World War as a symbol of friendship and eternal gratitude to Canadian troops who liberated the Netherlands. The Dutch are forever grateful. And so at the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the liberation, the Dutch came up with a tulip with the Canadian flag. And if you have a little bit of imagination, you can see the Canadian flag in some of them. Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah, Christine.
And what really bothers me sometimes when I read history books, it wasn't until the 80s, that Canadian politicians really began to appreciate what Canada's role had been in the war, and that they began to build statues and talk about it and write about it more. Whereas the Dutch people have been teaching their children in schools, they look after the graves. We're not talking about it in our elementary schools. The children don't know much about World War II. And so this was very disturbing to me that it took so many years after the war before they finally acknowledged what the veterans had done, and the veterans had to keep on asking and asking for help. Now, these are just 2 of my last slides. Our family went to Halifax 3 or 4 weeks ago to take the children to Dalhousie University there, and I came across this statue, the sailor statue. The statue is symbolic of thousands of valiant young sailors who were instrumental in the victory at sea during World War II, and the sacrifices they made and the horrific life they endured to help preserve democracy only became really clear to me until I visited this ship that they'll show you next. This is the HMCS Sackville, the last corvette. And Chris and I visited it in the daytime, but I went back at night to take a picture of the ship at night. And it really touched me very deeply, that whole experience. It was commissioned in 1941 and served as a mid-ocean convoy export in the North Atlantic. She engaged itself with enemy U-boats who were bent on sinking Allied and merchant ships during World War II. And along with other corvettes, the Sackveld helped win the crucial Battle of the Atlantic from 1939 to 145. And when Chris and I boarded her, something strange happened to me. It's hard to describe the feeling. People talk about looking through a window into the past. But it wasn't like that for me. I felt one with this valiant ship. We were the same age. I felt a part of her. And all the young men who worked in these cramped, dark, windowless, smoke-filled quarters, I was standing on holy ground. Just think, 10 seconds, and I'm quoting now from the writings of the Canadian Naval Memorial Trust. That's all they had. 10 seconds between fitful sleep in a cramped room of hammocks and chaos, 10 seconds teetering between survival and oblivion amidst the thunderous roar of the enemy gunfire and relentless onslaught of danger. The unwavering courage of those young men were forced to summon in these 10 seconds is unfathomable to most of us. It turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic, and that changed everything. If I were an artist, I would call that picture darkness, celebration, hope. The darkness of fear and despair, the bright lights of celebration and remembrance as we do today, and the reflection of hope for peace shining in the murmuring water. Just to be here because they knew this was such a special place to me, a place that keeps my memory.
Remembrance Day is an odd thing, isn't it? I'm part of that generation where I do remember Remembrance Days in school. And I remember the assemblies, and I remember going, wow, this is boring. And I had a mother and a father who lived through it. It just didn't touch me. And I don't think it ever really touched me until much later in life, when I had my own kids, and it was a Remembrance Day. And Facebook existed. That's the important part of the story. And I happened to be at home alone. The kids were all at school. They went to school at the time on a military base. So they were engaged in Remembrance Day activities for sure. And I got to thinking about Uncle Bill, and this was before Mom was writing her book. And this is what I wrote. Today I remember my Uncle Bill, William Bowers McKeever, who was not, in fact, my uncle at all. He was a Canadian soldier who took part in the liberation of Holland. After liberation, many Canadian soldiers were billeted with Dutch families during their stay in Holland. Uncle Bill lived with my mother's family from mid-April to September 1945. He broke bread with them and sat in the seat where only days before the Nazi soldier had been sitting, also billeted in their home, but by force. It must have been strange, no doubt, for everyone. Uncle Bill came from Brockville on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. He left his family, he took up arms, and he crossed an ocean to save my mom. But maybe he didn't see it that way. War has a way of getting dehumanized somehow, like it's not people fighting other people. We say Nazis, Axis, fascists, allies, communists. But to me, Uncle Bill saved my mom. He gave them hope. He gave them a future. 9 months passed. After his postings to Belgium and England, Uncle Bill returned home to Canada around December 4th, 1945. The war was over for him. that's not where the story ends. In 1953, Uncle Bill sponsored my mom's family to bring them to Canada. He invited my mom and my grandparents to live in his small clapboard house in Brockville. He shared his kitchen and the intimacy of his family with my mother and her parents for 2 years. Once again, Uncle Bill had given my mother and her family hope. He had opened his heart and shared of his life. He gave them a new future in Canada. 8 years later, my mother would marry my father, a German man who had himself lived through the war as a child. He had lost his older brother, pressed into service a mere few months before the war's end. He was a man whose family had lost everything to the Russians. He was a man who had come to Canada for a new life in the wake of tragedy. And Canada welcomed him, gave him hope that tomorrow would be better than yesterday, gave him a future and gave me a future. So today I thank Uncle Bill for the first time because as a kid I never did. To be honest, I never really cared. All the war stories just seemed so far away. They were like yesterday's news. They were subjects for history class. As a kid, the world seems to start with you. It seems to revolve around your tomorrow, not other people's past, even if those people are your parents. I feel shame for that. I lost touch with Uncle Bill many, many years ago, but in a very real and tangible way, the light of his selfless acts so many years ago still shines through in my daughter's giggly fits of laughter and in my son's playful spirit. They are happy children who have never known the suffering of their grandparents. Their world is only hope and peace and mostly joy. And for that, we all owe a debt of gratitude to Uncle Bill, lest we forget.
And this is the slide I always end my show with. It's the Peace Palace in The Hague, also the International Court of Justice. And even though World War II seems remote to us now, it has an important resonance for our times. I learned many things during World War II, but some lessons stand out. First of all, nothing in war is black and white. And the second, look at the heart. Do not judge people by what country they come from, because there is good and bad in every country. And if you will read my book, you will understand that was the teaching of my mother, because there were bad people in Holland, there were good people in Holland. Same in Germany, same in Russia, no matter where we are in the world. Look at the heart. What kind of person is it? That's another thing I learned from the war. And the third thing, know your political candidates well before you vote. And I always like to end with a quote from Irmgard A. Hunt, the author of On Hitler's Mountain. She was a little girl who sat on Hitler's knee, who lived across the crow's nest from Hitler. And she could never understand why her parents liked Hitler and her grandparents hated him. So when she became older and a teenager, she did all sorts of research and came to her own conclusions. And then, of course, she realized the horrible things that the Nazi regime had done. And she came to America, went to a university there, became a college professor, and she wrote a book on Hitler's Mountain. And this is in her foreword, and I like to answer or close the presentation with this. Always be on the lookout for the signs, however insidious or subtle and seemingly harmless of dictatorships in the making and to resist politics that are exclusive, intolerant, or based on ideological zealotry or ideas that demand unquestioned faith in one leader or flag. I hope that young people and people everywhere learn to recognize the danger signs and join me in the mission to prevent a recurrence of one of history's most tragic chapters. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for coming. We do have another presentation in October. The 35th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall is in November. So we have a late October presentation done by a PhD who did his dissertation on on the Berlin Wall. He works at the Swiss Embassy, but this is his area of expertise. So he's going to come and give a presentation on that at the end of October.
This is the slide I always end my show with. It's the Peace Palace in The Hague, also the International Court of Justice. And even though World War II seems remote to us now, it has an important resonance for our times. I learned many things during World War II, but some lessons stand out. First of all, nothing in war is black and white. And the second, look at the heart. Do not judge people by what country they come from, because there is good and bad in every country. And if you will read my book, you will understand that was the teaching of my mother, because there were bad people in Holland, there were good people in Holland. Same in Germany, same in Russia, no matter where we are in the world. Look at the heart. What kind of person is it? That's another thing I learned from the war. And the third thing, know your political candidates well before you vote. And I always like to end with a quote from Irmgard A. Hunt, the author of On Hitler's Mountain. She was a little girl who sat on Hitler's knee, who lived across the crow's nest from Hitler. And she could never understand why her parents liked Hitler and her grandparents hated him. So when she became older and a teenager, she did all sorts of research and came to her own conclusions. And then, of course, she realized the horrible things that the Nazi regime had done. And she came to America, went to a university there, became a college professor, and she wrote a book on Hitler's Mountain. And this is in her foreword, and I like to answer or close the presentation with this. Always be on the lookout for the signs, however insidious or subtle and seemingly harmless, of dictatorships in the making, and to resist politics that are exclusive, intolerant, or based on ideological zealotry or ideas that demand unquestioned faith in one leader or flag. I hope that young people and people everywhere learn to recognize the danger signs and join me in the mission to prevent a recurrence of one of history's most tragic chapters. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for coming. We do have another presentation in October. The 35th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall is in November. So we have a late October presentation done by a PhD who did his dissertation on on the Berlin Wall. He works at the Swiss embassy, but this is his area of expertise. So he's going to come and give a presentation on that at the end of October. Okay.